Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Matt the Family Guy, Kent the Cat Guy, Jacqueline from JP Mint, and Greg the Single Guy, bringing you episodes from around the world about the best kept secret in education. You've got it, international teaching. Welcome to the show. This is Greg coming to you from the International Teacher Podcast, and Kent is somewhere. I don't know where Kent is. I've lost him. And I do have JP Mint on here with me. How you doing tonight, JP Mint?
Hello. Good morning from Mexico.
That's right. It's good morning. And you know what, JP? This is going to be a great show. We have Renata McFarland on with us, and she is coming to us from the States. She's in Key West right now, but she's living in Boston. Did I say that right? Okay, I did say it right. Boston, the radar detective. How are you, Renata?
I don't speak like that. I don't pack my car and have it yet.
Oh, you did that.
Khakis.
Great. Welcome to the show.
I got my khakis.
My khakis.
Hi, Renata.
Hi, Jacqueline. How are you?
I'm so excited to have you on the show. And, I haven't seen you for, probably a few months, actually. It seems
Correct. Yeah.
We touch base. So, Greg, full disclosure, I know Renata, and I worked with her for 2.5 years in China.
Correct.
And I reached out to her when we were looking for guests. And by the way, little plug, if you would like to come on to the show, please visit itpexpat.com and sign up with our Calendly. So I reached out to Renata. I said, any chance we could get you on the show? And I harassed her for about 8 months. And finally she said yes.
Yes. Okay.
Hey, can I be a guest next time? Just kidding. So, Renata, you know JP Mint, and the whole world does for some reason. I mean, we got her on here. She turned into our boss, and all of a sudden she knows the whole world. And Kent and I are like, we don't even have to do any work anymore. We don't know what we do. All we do is sit around and talk while JP does all of the inviting. So if anybody that knows JP comes on here. So we have enough guests, I think, if they sign up for the next couple of years. It's going to be called
amazing.
The JP Mint Show. So, Renata, what are you joining us for tonight? I didn't get a chance to talk to you. I don't know you as well as JP. Can you give us, how about if we do this? Let's do this a little bit differently. Let's just have a short version of how you got into international education and how you got to where you're at now.
Yeah, sure. So, Greg, I am a product of expat parents. My parents worked for Department of Defense, and little love story note, they met in Europe. My mother was a principal after the war. My father was a reading teacher. They eloped in Rome and moved to Panama, and we have 5 brothers and sisters. So I lived overseas for almost 20 years.
And those are the DODS schools, the Department of Defense schools?
Yeah, Department of Defense, right.
And those are the schools that we can sign up for as teachers from the States. We sign up and you go somewhere in the world where we have a military base and you teach military kids. Did you grow up on a military base, like with your parents?
Yes, I
teaching?
did.
Wow.
Yes, we grew up in military bases, and then there was also, not only was there the military base, there were like residents for just the expats who work there. So, as those military bases grow, they need schools, they need recreations, they need hospitals. So literally these communities were built. And Panama was a very big community because there's the Atlantic and Pacific side. Yeah, it was an amazing experience.
So you grew up as a kid on those schools, and then...
So full disclosure, Greg is also an Army brat.
Oh, so I'm a Navy brat. I'm a military brat, but I'm more Navy, yes.
No, I didn't grow up on the military bases overseas. I grew up on mostly when I was like a little kid, 0 to 3 or 1 to 3. I was in Germany, but we didn't live on a military base. So we lived with the Germans, right? It was outside of Heidelberg in Heppenheim. But I'm interested to hear how that because that's a genuine beginning. A lot of us Army brats are end up going overseas. So I'm hoping to hear some more about how that took you into what you're doing now.
So a little link between you and I was born in Munich, Germany. So my parents were there, yes. So how that brought me overseas, my whole life was working in this international community. I went to a Catholic school, Sisters of Mercy. in Panama, and a lot of expats brought their children in there. That was my whole life of meeting people from around the world all the time. I had best friends from Vietnam, best friends from you name it, Europe, Asia. I had best friends, Japan, everywhere. And when I moved back to the United States, because my brothers are born there, the current dictator at the time was demanding that all 14 and 15-year-olds, I think it was Omar Torrijos, register for the military. And my mother was like, that's not happening. So we moved to Cape Cod, and I moved back to the United States. I went to school and Bridgewater, got my educational degree. I first started off in physical therapy at Worcester, moved to Bridgewater, where my mom went to Bridgewater Normal. And I got my educational degree, started teaching. I ended up teaching in these, what we call gateway schools, where a lot of immigrants, Spanish speaking, because I spoke Spanish. I studied, English was the monolingual of the classroom, but Spanish was taught to us every single year. You had classes every single year, all the way to 12th grade. When I married, I had children. I took AFS students, American Foreign Services, AFS. So that was still my link to being overseas, because the US just wasn't familiar for me. Although I enjoyed it, I just had this desire. So when my children became old enough to travel, my stepdaughter went overseas. My two children began traveling with me when I started working for Endicott College. They developed a cohort for a Master's of International Education in Madrid. And I also had family. My daughter had married a AFS exchange student I had, and they had family in Madrid and Venezuela. So, it was kind of like this. I loved it. And when I started teaching overseas and doing CIS accreditations, I was just like, oh, this is in my blood. I have to go back. So when my children were pretty much out of college and I had divorced, I decided, like, this is it. I'm going. And that was it. There was no turning back. So I started doing that. That's how I came back overseas again. And I've loved it ever since.
All right. I'm speechless. I'm like, okay, where does it go after that? You were a teacher. Did you start teaching in different countries? Can you tell us some of the countries that you taught in then?
When I talk about when I went back and had that international desire to be overseas again, was I was teaching in higher education, because I had attained my doctorates from Nova Southeastern University. And it was a blended online, face-to-face type mix. And I started teaching in Madrid and started meeting tons of international teachers who had been teaching, just I had been, but really wanted to get into leadership or wanted to get their masters, because that would have gotten them a higher pay. And that was when I was drawn in, I got the bug, I have to go do this. So I taught for Endicott College in Madrid, Lausanne, Switzerland, which is at the Lausanne American International School. CIS was College of International Studies in Madrid. Then I was in Prague. Then I went to Thailand. And I think those are the four major places where I was teaching, all international schools. Then when I decided to leave public education, where I was working with all these gateway immigrant, ethnically mixed schools, second language type thing, learning the mono English language, I decided to go overseas. And I had the opportunity to go to Asia, because I've always loved Asia. My father told me such great stories when he was in there during the war, and he was in Japan and Korea. So I ended up in Indonesia, and I was at a founding school, and it was Eaton House. They sold these franchises, and I started developing these primary kindergartens, and I was there I kind of worked for almost 6 months before I got there, because it was building the school, doing a lot of hiring. Then after 2.5 years there, I went to Asia, and that's where I met Jacqueline. I got hired through Xiao Hung Sumner through Search Associates for OCAC, Overseas Chinese Academy of Chiwei, and I haven't looked back since. I started out as the head of school for early years. I built from being in another country, from the foundation up, a school, hired people, trained them, and then I built, within 3 months I was there, they said, hey, we need you to build another kindergarten. I built another kindergarten, and then halfway through they were like, look, we need you to take over the primary and early years. So then I took over that, and then the pandemic hit, and they were like, hey, we've transferred the current head of school. We need you to step into this role. And then I stayed there till I needed to repatriate myself because of the pandemic, and have loved ever since. And I've had some great learning experiences and traveled quite a bit and met. And the best thing was, Greg, was that the students that I had 8 and 10 years ago became some of my employees. And
Employees.
yes, and
Wow.
it's funny because I was just talking to Jacqueline earlier, and I was talking about this teacher I knew, and she was like, "Is his wife Jennifer?"
So
I
and
was
so.
like, "Yes."
So you mean you got some kindergartners and within 8 years they're already in the workforce?
No,
That's pretty
No,
cool.
no.
I
teachers,
mean, kindergartens,
teachers.
I've been working for years on kindergartners and I can't get them into like 4th grade without like multiple years. You're
No,
amazing.
they were teachers. It was just, and it was,
Kindergarten to workforce. What a great package to sell. Does anybody else know about this?
no, don't share. No, it was really humbling, but yet saying to myself, am I getting that old? Because people were like, or when I was in Thailand teaching someone's husband, the wife would come in, I go, and she goes, "Oh my God, you were my teacher." I was like, oh my God, darn, this
I don't
just
know
makes me feel
anything
so
about what
old.
you're talking about. I'm only 25. I mean, seriously, you guys, I've been overseas for like 24 years, but I'm only 25 years old. You know, I've been teaching since I was 1. And
Oh, well, you are just so amazing
yeah,
then.
I know.
Greg.
Isn't that amazing?
Well, Greg is always saying that this is the smallest district is the world. The international circuit is the smallest district. I will tell you a funny little story. I don't know, Renata, if you knew this, or I think you heard this, but when you came in, I came in January 2018 to the
Right,
OCAS organization and started building their boarding department because they
right.
were at that time a K to
K
5 or K to
five.
6.
Yeah,
Yeah.
K to five.
So
Yep.
so they wanted to have a boarding department. They wanted to open up a high school, middle school, high school, and the boarding department. We were kind of figuring out what does that look like. So I came in 6 months before that school started, and I remember meeting you in March. And when I met you, I
I
had very
flew
good
over.
I had very good friends at another school next door at SSIS, Suzhou, Singapore. I was
Yes.
talking to them about this fantastic lady that I just really hit it off with. Her name is Dr. Renata McFarland. And my friend froze, and you know her, Fernanda Raimundo. She froze and she said, "You know Dr. Renata?" And I said, "Wait, how do you know Dr. Renata?"
It's a
Turns out
small world.
she went to Madrid for Endicott
Mm-hmm.
College and she took a course from Renata. And here we are in China, the two of us
Yep.
talking about this woman I had just thought of her as coming from Indonesia, you know? So it was
Yeah,
just that
no.
is how small this world is.
And I had her husband in class too.
Really? Alex
Yes.
was also taking
Alex.
courses. Oh my
Yes.
gosh.
So the whole world knows
Yes,
Dr.
Greg.
Renata McFarland and the whole world knows JP Mint and
Well,
everybody else. But I don't know something. Can you help us with, and the listeners, and help me?
yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about this? Because it sounds like the foundation, it sounds like multiple schools keep sending you, or this group of people keep sending you to open up a new school. It sounds sort of like a school district. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think my experience came from in the public schools where I was really drawn to working with children of second languages or immigrant children. And then what they would do at that time in the United States, I think they were looking at, because they had level 1 schools, 2, 3, these tiered schools that where they were failing or not, right? They weren't meeting the No Child Left Behind thing. And they were giving out grants to develop these schools. So I began I was in the Haverhill School District and the Salem School District. Haverhill for quite a time, but Haverhill had quite a few grants to develop these children so that they became monolingual. And this is where I kind of got myself into leadership, into interim positions or, part-time positions where they were, trying these new programs to really get children to become monolingual and to assimilate and amalgamate into the culture of the Americans so that the families could, become functional, the whole deal when you bring an immigrant into your community. And that was my experience. And I had such a good time at it. I decided when I left public education, I really wanted to just do this overseas. So my focus was to look for founding schools that needed support, because I knew as a higher educational adjunct professor and teacher trainer what they needed at the base level so that they could be functional and successful. And so that's what I really focused my area in on. And that's what I do as an international educational consultant right now for middle level or new leaders.
When we talk about the different schools that you opened up then, like overseas, and you
Mm-hmm.
worked on a kindergarten and then you went over here and you did a preschool and then they brought you back. And are they separate schools that we're talking about, or was it a foundation?
No, the first school was a privately owned franchise,
Got it.
and
Okay.
it's from it's Singapore based, and it's called Eaton House. But they've now re-imaged it and they call it Middleton Surabaya because it was in Surabaya, Indonesia.
Got it.
And then the founding school was done by Kevin. I can't remember Kevin's last name, Jacqueline, but Chiwei. He owns Chiwei. Xiao Hung Sumner was hired as the CEO, and she interviewed me at Search Associates.
I don't know about you two, but I always get the question, "Well, who do you work for? Is this like some company you work for?" And I say, "No, I'm a free agent."
Right, right.
I always like to clear that up. And even if someone's just joining in our episode or just listening in, we don't work for a company that has all these schools around the world. So
Yeah.
sometimes you run into a foundation of schools, though. And like the GEMS Academy, they set up schools all over the world. They have,
Right.
right?
Or
And
Nord
there's
Anglica. Yeah.
exactly,
Nord
right?
Anglica. Yeah,
And there's a
exactly.
bunch of these that are, and Bazes is starting up in China and they're getting really big with multiple schools, but we don't work for specific schools
No.
like a big company. We're not like the
Right.
international teacher company, although maybe we should start that.
We're,
Just
Ooh.
we're
kidding.
our own independent agent.
We are free
Yeah,
agents, exactly. So
yes,
that was
we're,
what I was asking to clear up with you. And
mm,
you are also doing the same thing at a leadership level because the leaders do the same thing. You're your own agent, right?
right. Exactly. And my biggest thing is why when I came back home, I was like, well, do I go back overseas? What do I do? And then I had watched Jacqueline start her JP Mint and how it became so successful. And I talked to two other colleagues who had kind of gone on that way. I decided, I'm going to step out into this because I felt like I really made an impact with the teachers that I worked with, because they were constantly coming back to me, Greg, and saying, I need help. I'm in this role. I'm applying for this job. Can you help me out with this? And I think that was one of the things that during my leadership career period, I probably had about two good mentors who were really great. And I really learned a lot from them. And I've had other mentors who were just, deplorable, but that's besides the point. And I felt like if someone really wants this and I feel they have the skill for that, I want to give them the support. I don't want to give them all my knowledge. It's more like the support that I can give them and direct them in the path that they need to go. I think our biggest thing was some of these founding schools, Greg, as you know, they start out really small and then they just explode. So I think when we started out at OCAC, I think there was 330 kids,
And
something like that.
OCAC is which one?
The Overseas Chinese Academy.
Overseas
Okay.
Chinese Academy of Suzhou. It was OCAS. And then Chiwei decided to
Changed it.
rebrand. And so they said OCAC Suzhou because they were
Right.
opening other OCACs in China.
Right.
So let me just,
Right.
for our listeners, in case they're interested, we often talk about international schools, then we talk about national schools with international staff and international
Right.
curriculum. So our OCAC was an international curriculum, international teachers, but for local students. And essentially, the idea
It was a private.
was that Chinese parents who were overseas and had kids overseas and going to these international schools overseas were coming back to China. China was drawing them back, their talent. They needed their talent in China. Well, what do you do with these kids that are essentially,
Had been
overseas
English
kids?
overseas,
And
English schools, international
yeah.
curriculums. Yeah.
So we opened this school, or we kind of created this idea that these Chinese national kids that have sort of an international flair can come to this school and learn more about their Chinese background, their Chinese heritage, but at the same time
Right.
have the IB program. So it was,
Correct.
so Renata can actually talk to bringing in PYP, MYP, and DP, because
Right.
when we started OCAC there or OCAS, there was no accreditation yet. So
Right.
we found that with a lot of really good, talented people that came in to help that accreditation.
Right. Right. And as I was saying, what I found that as schools really grow fast, sometimes if you can't get the really qualified teacher, the experienced person, they'll just pull someone from internally. And then these internal candidates are like struggling, going like, oh, hello, I was just an INS middle school, teacher. And now you're asking me to work with these expats to do this. And I don't know how to run a meeting. I don't know how to do a report. So I realized because a lot of our local teachers are very intelligent, and I felt like they didn't get the respect they needed at times. And because we grew from 330 to almost 2,000 students within 2 years,
Yeah,
It's
in just a few
crazy.
years.
it was
Yeah.
like a 68, 70% growth rate. By the second year, and the next year was 70. It was huge. We were just massive. I mean, 8 classes of kindergarten of like 24 in a class. It was just massive. And that's kind of where I felt like my leadership skills came in. Like I really needed to support these new leaders, middle level leaders, all at the same time trying to go through accreditation. And I had a lot of background experience in accreditation. So that was a big challenge. I learned a lot, but yet I know that there were some people who realized after a year, this isn't for me. I just want to go back and teach kids. I love what I do. I just don't want leadership, or others felt like I got the bug. I have a taste of it. I want to do half and half, or I want to go full all the way. So
Can I ask you a question? Are you still doing this now? Is this still the position that you're in?
no, I left that in
That's what you were doing before.
22.
Okay.
Yes.
As a teacher coming into the international, it's a little bit scary because sometimes people start talking. We start talking about the IB, the International Baccalaureate. We start talking about the early years program, which is the primary years program, the
Hmm.
PYP. And a lot of questions are out there like, how can I get into a school that is doing that? So my question is, should a teacher that's interested in or trying to get into international, should they be trying for some schools even if they don't have the experience?
We really hired a lot of teachers who had no IB experience, but they were very interested in it. And how we knew they were interested because they're like, well, I've been teaching in, Delaware or North Carolina, and I haven't only been doing the US standards, but I looked into it and I really like it. And I was like, okay, tell me what you learned. And that's when I knew those teachers really want to do something different and learn more. They were excited.
So as a leader, you are looking for the right person, not the necessarily the IB experience, but someone willing to go into that and learn to be an IB, PYP, MYP teacher. Am I right?
Exactly. Yes. And we did have, a small percentage at the time when it was like a 50-50 of 50% expats, 50% local teachers. We had of that 50%, probably 30% had never done IB before,
That many.
So yeah, because this is a brand new school and we were recruiting the best teachers we could that had the most experience, knew how to work with dual language, had classroom experience, understood what it was like to teach students who did not speak English for the
Right.
first time, behavioral management. So it was a good training. We had a lot of great training.
What I also loved about OCAC was the diversity of our staff. Many times we hear about
Yes.
native English speakers only, which drives me crazy when recruiters or schools
Right.
are touting that. That's in their job description. Because what I loved about OCAC was we were hiring Russians, we were hiring Filipinas,
South
South
Africans,
Africans, I mean,
Filipinas. Yeah.
Singaporeans, people that grew up in English or had studied a lot of English in their youth and were
Yeah.
essentially
Hmm.
native English speakers just without the right passport, and it was driving me crazy that
Right.
they weren't seeing, their career kind of taking off. But OCAC was open, and especially the leadership was open
Mm.
to hiring these fantastic teachers just with different passports. And that lent such a wealth and richness to our culture, our school culture, and our community.
Community.
I
Yeah.
loved having friends and
Yeah.
colleagues from all over the world. Talk about the benefit for our students, because they themselves, being some of them coming from overseas, they felt very at home with these teachers, because if they were studying in Prague
Mm.
and here's their Czech teacher walking in, they can actually feel, you know, welcomed and everything else.
The accent wasn't a problem for them, whereas the parents really had more of a problem. But yes, I mean, I think we represented 24 countries at that one
Oh,
time, at one
staff,
point.
yeah,
Yeah.
just
And for such a young
Yeah.
school, that was incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now let's talk a little bit about what Renata is doing now. We've hinted about it, but I'd like to hear, Renata,
Mm.
what are you doing? How are you helping international education still, and still you have two strong feet in the circuit?
So I'm currently right now still working for Endicott College, and that's been about 25 years. But in those 25 years, there was the pandemic, and a couple times when I took big leadership positions, I didn't teach. But I'm still doing Masters of International Education and Masters of International Education for Leadership. So I'm still teaching there. And then with my consulting business, internationaleducationalconsultant.com, what I'm doing is I'm partnering not only basically with some really good colleagues that I've met overseas to support teachers back overseas who have contacted me going, I need help. I don't know how to do this. How do we do this? Because the pandemic has really just really uprooted and flipped our style of teaching. And my most recent webinar was on how to get yourself ready for Chinese New Year with behavior with children. I had a specialist, Jessica Bain-Zabrowski, and she talked about and worked with me. I talked on the leadership aspect of what my role as a leader to support behavioral children with discipline problems. And she talked about, as a learning specialist, all the strategies and skills that you can implement within the classroom to help support you and better support before it gets to that higher level. So we had a really successful webinar. We just did that in January, and my next one's going to be in April, because I'm really focusing right now in early years teachers. They're the ones that are reaching out the most to me, some primary teachers, on pre-reading literacy skills and how they can get parents to put down the technology and really help develop children's literacy reading skills, because that is becoming quite a problem in today's society,
Yeah,
as we
pick up a
know.
book, right? Put everything away, pick
Exactly.
up a book. Mom and dad don't do it, right? If mom and dad
Yeah,
would pick up a book and read, maybe their kids would too.
exactly. And that instant gratification of a book, they don't know how to get that, right? So I'm working with some various leaders, and then I'm slowly bringing some people that I've worked with over the last 25 years in to be able to just work with me as a consultant to support people, whether it's online or I fly over face to face. My biggest population of support is right now is in China and Indonesia. These are just teachers and middle level leaders who are like, I don't know where to go, and no one's I didn't study for this, so I don't know what to do. How do I do this?
One of the hardest things overseas as a teacher, and I know this from my first years that I cut my teeth in Honduras, And it was
Right.
the fact that when I first started, this was 100 years ago, but when I first went overseas, I just didn't have a lot of PD. Like we might have one regional PD, like
Right.
one regional conference for the year if we got to go to it. But I remember it, I was with a lot of teachers that either just didn't have the other resources or just were too busy to help me out. And you talk about mentors and having to have one, but I didn't always have one, and I didn't always have someone to reach out to or who to
Right.
ask. So it sounds like to have a great option for me as a teacher somewhere in the world, and to
Mm,
get some professional advice, some help, some guidance, either from a leadership point of view or just from a homeroom point of view on like I'm
exactly.
stuck. I could Google it till I'm blind. I could go Googling stuff, but it doesn't always help.
Right.
I want to talk to somebody that's been in the trenches, right?
And it's also, Greg, that element of like, do I show my weakness as a teacher that I don't know what to do, or do I just like cover it, or do I just like privately go off? So one of my big things that I brought into the two schools, at founding schools, was having PLCs, having these conversations, that art of having a conversation. And I myself learned this from one of the professors at Salem State, who do the school reform SRI. It's blanking. I'm blanking right now, but
Initiative?
um, yeah, a school. Yeah, that's a school reform initiative, and it gave it these protocols, and I learned how to use these protocols when I was stateside. It was very powerful to me, and I brought it into the classroom with the teachers, and we had this great training. And afterwards, some of these teachers have been teaching for 30 years. They were like, "I've never done this before. It was so scary for me, Renata, to tell you." I didn't know what you meant when you said literary anthology, and I've been teaching for 30 years. And I was like, yeah, but Carla, it's okay.
Mhm.
Nobody's perfect. That's the point of these. And it brought in, well, I read an article. Who is a teacher today, Greg, really has time to read unless they're studying for a master's or getting another degree?
I do.
Unless you're,
He has time.
Kent and I
unless,
both don't stop.
yeah, that's great though. But I know many teachers are like, I can't remember when I last read something that helped me. I found our IBO to be phenomenal bank of information.
The International Backlit Organization, right?
Organization,
IBO.
yes.
Yep.
And I would always send them like, go to this website. They've got great people who do these little blogs, these little write-ups, or give you suggestions and strategies. But sometimes those are great, and that took time. But when you actually did real face-to-face time and communication, it was powerful.
There's
Right.
something to be said about having professional development right in-house. And I think you're
Yeah,
learning, Greg, that Renata was a bank of PD, in-house PD. We talk about going to conferences or going outside of our school
right.
for workshops. But a lot of the times, you send one person off to a workshop, and if they come back and they sort of distill what they got out of the workshop with staff members,
Mm,
it's one thing. But it's another if you can have an in house professional developer on staff who, I mean, the number of times I heard teachers' aha moments when they were doing the Making PYP Happens with Renata. So
right.
you can have
Mm,
these experts be in-house, and then everyone is on the same page, everyone's talking the same language, you're getting all the training
right.
for all the school at the same time.
So the school hires you to come in and do a training seminar or over a number of
Right.
days, a couple courses with their staff to prepare them for the next steps or to refresh.
Right, right. And I have to say, one of our most successful was instructional rounds, which was really, really big because we had to do formal and informal observations as principals, deputy principals, coordinators,
Yep, every school I've been to.
subject area leaders. And I found a lot of people didn't know how to do those. So I said, okay, let's just go look at what we really need to look at is student learning. Forget what the teacher's doing. What are the students learning? So we would pick one thing, like, how are they reading? How is their reading? How are they responding in English? Like, we just picked one thing and went in and did these instructional rounds. I gave them all kinds of reading stuff. We had preparation training. We did some mock trials, and then we did some real stuff in the classroom. So we went through all these steps throughout the whole year. And it was really powerful for the teachers because then they realized, oh, I need to really communicate more with Valia in that classroom because she's really successful and she's my colleague who's 3 classrooms down and I had no idea what
Peer
she was
teaching.
doing.
Right.
Right. So it was really powerful. And I learned that again myself from just being a leader and administrator and all the things that were coming down the pike in public education.
I'm a lucky teacher right now because I have a principal who's the kind of guy that would say, listen, if you want to go and evaluate or just to sit in on your peer teacher, you want to go down the
Yeah.
hallway for a period, I'll take your class for the period. If you
Yes,
let
I
me know
used to
ahead
do
of
that.
time, right? And that's one of the
Yeah.
most powerful things that
Yes,
an
it is.
administrator can give to his teaching staff is to give that opportunity because most of people wouldn't even take him up on it. But I would right away, and I think that is powerful to go and watch your colleagues teach, especially in the grade level. I don't know, maybe go see how your teacher's doing music. I would try and get out of meetings just to go with my students to a special. Every time when I was
Hmm.
a homeroom teacher, I would go just to see my students with that specialist to see how my kids acted,
Mhm.
right, with another
Yes.
teacher.
Yes.
But on the other hand, I also wanted to make myself a better teacher with watching another teacher teach a different grade level or to see their teaching style. And I didn't
Mm.
always have that opportunity as a homeroom teacher unless I had admin buy in and they offered. And then I'd be the first one to take them into it. A lot of admin don't even know that kind of a trick. And it sounds like part of what you build into your PDs is to train the leadership to think that way.
Right. And it really was, it was a challenge because that's what we have schools for. They're not for us. They're for the children. And, what do we want from these children? What does the world need? It's not. So like you said, Greg, I scheduled when I was in lower level and primary, I used to schedule so many blocks out of the day. Like, okay, who wants me to come cover their class? Because not only was that powerful for them, I was able to, when a parent complained, to say, oh no, I've been in that class. I know what's going on in that class. Oh, I know all the children in this class. To me, that was really, really strong. So when someone above me, as I was a principal and I had a deputy, a test superintendent, they'd come in and say, we've got this. I was like, no, you're wrong because I've been in there. Or yes, you're correct. This is what's going on. And they were either kind of wowed away or kind of shocked, like, well, how do you have the
Mm.
time?
Well, you
You
make the
just
time, and it's the way you organize your
Exactly.
time, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's very powerful that you do that with leadership at schools and you're consulting now so that they can get a school could listen to this and say, hey, let's get in touch with Dr. Renata. It sounds like one of these super PDs that we can bring to our school rather than you're doing it in a certain part of the states or something they have to travel to. So that sounds
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'm doing right now. And I've been trying to write in my blogs monthly, 2 blogs a month about what really occurs as a leader during that certain time of the year.
In real time.
One of the ones I shared, yeah, in real time, one of the ones I shared was like, as an international teacher, there's certain holidays that aren't celebrated anywhere around the world, and it's interesting that how people are like, oh, you Canadians celebrate Thanksgiving with us too. As Americans, we're like, oh, no, 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 no.
No,
The
that's in
Canadians are like,
October.
no, we don't. That's in October. Exactly. So, we had these big Friendsgivings where it was a big cultural learning. I think it was very powerful to be able to do quite a bit of these different venues of Friendsgiving when I talked about that in these blogs. And people were like, oh my gosh, yeah, that was my best time because then I talked to other teachers about where they were teaching. And I learned a little bit more about Korea, or I learned a little bit more about Singapore, or where, because my contract's ending. I tried to talk about when we know contracts are ending, rehiring time. Jacqueline gives points about things that when you're going to look for schools, contract packages. So these are, my most recent was HR. You really need a good HR person in your
Mm.
school.
It's huge because not only, yeah, not only they're doing the contracts, but they're also having to do the work visas, all of that government bureaucracy lining up
Yeah.
at government offices to, submit passports and everything. Absolutely.
Right. So like I was listening when Alan was talking, going, he spends like 75% of his time recruiting. I did too.
Right.
And I had to work really close with my HR person to say, I want you to go to these. Where are these educational job fairs? Where are the teachers applying from? I need you to go to this one, this one, this one, and this one, because this is where we're going to get these quality teachers. This is what I'm looking for.
I think that the arrival and the first couple days, the first
Yes.
couple weeks of a school
Onboarding.
contract for a
Onboarding,
we call it onboarding,
huge.
is the one thing that will make or break whether or not you have staff stay through the contract and beyond. It depends on those first days and how you are brought into your school.
Exactly. And I learned that after my first school in Indonesia, because my experiences were not the greatest. And then when I started bringing more staff in, I was like, oh, no, 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 they're not going to go through what I went through. So when we came over to China, and we started, I had a really good experience because our CEO was, she was not only Chinese, but a Canadian expat herself too, right?
So she knew Thanksgiving was in October.
She knew.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was great because she really brought it in. And my thing was, okay, I had Chinese local teachers who were hired and who were already there on board. And I was like, I need you to mentor this teacher and answer all their questions. If you can't,
Nice.
meet up with HR and do this. So we expanded that as we went. We made sure that every time, and then our onboarding was huge. That's where we met Jacqueline, because sometimes in large schools, you don't get to meet other people, right? And we did these.
They did
these,
K to 12
Travis
onboarding so that, they were mixing.
It was so much fun.
They were mixing the primary, the the early years, the high school, all mixed together, all the new staff, so that, because we knew once the school started that they were not really going to see much of each other, with staff meetings being very divisional.
Work within your own divisions.
And so that was so precious. But what I also love is when they mix the local staff in. So when you have local new hires mixing with expat hires, that is so rich, because now the expats have a few people to go to run to during the year. Like, oh my gosh, I just had this crazy parent meeting. Is this normal? Is this, am I seeing things when this happens? And then that local hire teacher can say, oh yeah, no, that's very normal for us, or, kind of walk them through it. They're a fount of knowledge that if they didn't have that onboarding, bonding time, they wouldn't feel comfortable being vulnerable, going and asking their local teachers for that.
So, Greg, I have to tell you a little story. What I did in one of, and actually in both schools, I grew up with a family that did big, holidays activities all the time. So I brought some of my culture into Indonesia and China, and it was called the Easter egg hunt. And what I did with each one is I had translated in English to the local language. So it was Bahasa and it was in Chinese. I partnered up the expats with the local teachers, but the local teachers had to read the directions in Bahasa and then explain in English to what we had to do. And I put them in groups, and I had these Easter eggs with candy and money and, like, we'll take your class for half a day. You get a half a day off. Like, we as leaders, like, had these little gift certificates and coupons or cards.
Teacher gifts, yep.
Yeah, it was like gifts they really wanted. Like, oh, I get to come in late till 10 o'clock. I'm all about that. Like, that would be great. Especially if we had a teacher who just had a baby and she was so tired, right? So we had these Easter egg hunts, and I went and got, from Taobao, all these Easter eggs, and we filled them all up. And it was like the best time because they bonded so well that they really clicked. They learned things about one another. They learned how to communicate. And then they really had developed friendships. It wasn't just in school, even outside, when they realized like, oh, your husband does this and so does mine. Oh, let's go to dinner. And it was really a lot of fun. And those are the things that I think really make a school not only culture, but the community. And to this day, I know they still do things like that.
That's awesome.
I don't think they use
it's
the money.
legacy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would just love it if I was a new teacher coming to your school at that time, if I was coming into that culture, I would be amazed, because not only that, but the Easter egg hunt was probably around the campus of your school. So you could find out where the bathrooms are, right? Because I remember when I first moved to this school, I was in one building and I didn't even know where the bathroom was for the first 6 months. I always told kids, like, I don't know where to take you to PE. I have no idea. No one showed me around, right?
Right. It was really so funny.
You can match so many things together with the local hires. And I've always said in majority, almost every case of school internationally, is the local teachers are the ones that outlive the contracts of the expat teachers that come in. There's a lot of times there is a difference between, there's an inequality in the local hire salary. and benefits
Correct.
compared to the expats. But that can only be overcome through relationships, I think, because otherwise you
Right.
have an us and
Mhm.
them. And as an international teacher, the only advice I can give you is get to know your local teachers more than anybody, as well as your secretary in
Mhm.
HR. But get to know your local higher teachers because you already have a built-in security blanket to the community,
Hmm.
right? Because they're
True.
there. I remember bring up Easter. I went to in Honduras. I was just landing. I went with this guy named Eusebio, and he was from the States, but he had been down in Honduras for so long. He was married
Yeah.
locally, and we went
Uh-huh.
out to his in-laws' place. It was out on a like the Dole plantations where they do all of the work. And
Yeah.
we went out there, and I asked his in-laws. I said, "What's that pig walking around?" They're like, "That's Thanksgiving."
Mhm.
They named their pig Thanksgiving. And I was like, that's such a hunter, like a campesino, like a worker in the field.
Yeah, it comes
That's
in,
part of their
yes.
house, right? That's part of their living there. They were really hard workers. It was very poor, but Eusebio opened my eyes to that part of their culture. And I couldn't
Mm.
have gotten that by just being the teacher that just goes to school and then goes off traveling on the
Mhm.
weekends. I really tried to localize myself with the local staff. And I love that you brought together the local staff with the incoming or expat teachers because that was
And
powerful.
I think I'd learned that when I think back, as you were talking about that, you just brought those memories back to Panama. My
Ah,
father was very big into going into the interior, the interior, and exploring and meeting. At the time, we had,
Like Peace Corps?
yes, I believe it was Peace Corps. And he would go in and check on these Americans to make sure they were okay, because they were literally in these interior sections. They were teaching people how to raise pigs to be successful, these native
Mm.
local people. My father was a hunter. And so we used to go with these. And I remember when I tell people, I've been with these dirt poor families, but I had the best time.
hunting
I
wild
slept
boar
in
in the jungles
Panama.
of Panama.
Wow.
Oh yes, let me tell you. And it was just, we slept in hammocks. And when I tell people when I was in the US, what we did, they were kind of like, oh, I would never do that. But I was such a young
Mhm.
child. It was we had such an amazing life. Like we've seen Bushmasters, we've seen Quadamundis. It was just really a great experience.
Well, international teachers can do that
Mhm.
now if they break
Yes,
out of their shell and if they get to know their
exactly.
locals, because every country has some kind of little gems out there that are outside of your school. And
Mm.
in many countries, I don't do it here in this country now, but in most every other country I've lived in, I've branched out and gotten to know some local people. And then you have all these stories to tell later. Like I ate a
Right.
tarantula, or I got run over
Ugh.
by a rhino in Africa,
Well,
or, something
I get to say with
crazy.
Renata's husband Bob, the two of us had our first chicken foot. So, the actual
Yeah.
claws with the little nails and stuff.
Ooh.
I've never had
Yeah.
one of those. I was living in China at the time, like already a year or 6 months, and never had the nerve to try it. But when I saw Bob dive in, I was like, all right, I'll try it. And stinky
I'll
Wait,
tofu.
do
wait,
it.
wait. Wait. How did they serve it, JP? How did her husband and you
It
eat
was on a
this? Was it
stick.
like
It was like on a
popcorn
chopstick.
on
Stick.
a
Yeah,
stick?
and
Yeah.
then you just kind of gnaw away at it. And
You
it
just kind
was
of
like
like,
a very
yeah,
chewy chicken wing, but
it's
it's
tender,
just
Bob said.
very
Yeah.
tough to get over that mental picture like I'm going to be eating a chicken foot.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Wow.
I wanted to chime in, Greg, and say that one of the other things too is that everywhere I went, I've learned that if you develop leadership, because I know private schools can be very competitive. So what I would always reach out to the principal next door or to the local school principal just to be able to connect with them. But yet they can be very competitive and very private. But I started doing that when I first came to Indonesia to really learn more and understand about the Ministry of Education. What are they looking for? Why do they keep coming in? That was very powerful to me to be able to make those connections and learn a little more.
And not worry so much about the proprietary of the particular package you were
Right, right.
selling. That's smart.
Right. And I just learned, like, some of them have been there longer than me, 10, 15 years. And, they would share stuff that no one would ever tell me. I'd be like, oh no, I didn't know about that. That's great. Thank you. I found that very powerful. So that was that like little critical friends group that we would meet like not once a month, but maybe once every 2 or 3 months, and would sit and have beers and drinks or wherever we were. And we would talk about like, okay, well, I just want to let you know, here's the down low, what's going on here. And here's the latest of what we're a problem with these people who have a lot of money. They're trying to jump from school to school, or the ministry is now going to change this. And so it was very powerful for me. I took that risk to always go outside of the box, I would say.
It sounds like leadership now, the new leadership that are up and coming could definitely reach out. They could learn a lot from you because
Yes.
you've already been down that road in different countries, not just in one. You're good at
Right.
leadership. And these stories that you have and, showing the way, that's how you're giving back right now. It sounds like is that you're trying to
Yeah, that's
pass
my
on what you've
goal.
learned,
Yeah.
right? This is the place we do that. ITP.
Yes.
We do that. We share it. We
Yes.
pass it along.
So I want to
That's
ask
great.
Renata, in all your travels from childhood to adulthood, do you have a police story for our listeners? I can imagine you must, but is there one that you can share with us?
A police story. I don't think I've ever been. Oh, I do have one
There
in
we go.
Indonesia. In Indonesia, it was right around Ramadan, and they would target bules, white people, they called them bules. They would target them and pull them over and ask for money. That's how the police got their money. They warned me about it, and I had never been bothered. I had a driver, but I let him go home on weekends to his family because I saw no need for this man to sit around and wait on me when I could drive a car and go wherever I wanted to. So I was going out shopping, and I got pulled over. The guy started trying to speak to me in his broken English. Well, I started speaking in French to him. I go, "Oh, monsieur, no me comprende." I was telling him, "Ma quoi, hospital, my heart." And then he began to like panic. And I was telling him I was going to go to the hospital. So he followed me to the hospital. I went
You
into the
lied
basement.
to him? Oh
Yes!
my God.
Because I knew that they were going to pull money out of me. But I went into the basement and I waited, and he just kind of then got bored and took off. And then I got back in the car and I drove to finish go shopping.
That's smart. I've never thought of doing something like that.
No, I just pretended. I feigned that I
You
didn't know
went
English.
to the hospital just to follow through with your scam, like to get out of
It was very close. It was very close.
That
So I
is
lived
so
here,
funny.
and down the road, not even 800 meters was the hospital, and then another 800 meters was the international papaya store or whatever. So I was like, okay, this is what I'm doing. But the girls had told me about it, and I had met a lot of teachers from like the International Surabaya Expat School and Sekolah Ciputra and Merlion School, the Singaporean school. And so all these teachers, they're like, "Oh, you have to be very careful. Don't do this, don't do that." So I had this like, and it just like, that's the one thing I did.
Awesome. And using your
I
foreign
love that
language
story.
skills. Woohoo! Foreign language skills for the win.
And my French is very like, when I'm in France, I can get by, I can pass, I can order, get a plane ticket, go to the bathroom,
So
that
funny
type of
you
thing, ask
thought
for
French
direction.
instead of Spanish, which you're fluent in. You could have switched to Spanish.
Well, because there was Spanish there. So they had no problem with it, because Bahasa is very similar to Spanish.
Oh.
And he thought that if he could speak English, he had me. And I just feigned French, like, "Je ne me comprends, monsieur."
French is that foreign world language, isn't it? I tell you. Hey,
Yeah.
question for you. In all your travels, do you take something with you when you move to a new country? Is there something like 3 things that you have to have?
Well, I'm gluten intolerant. So that back then, many years ago, was a struggle for me. So I would always try to bring like my gluten intolerant crackers or my pancake mix or a flour mix to kind of last me till I could figure out at a market if I could buy something online.
Yeah.
And I think one of my worst experiences I was with my husband, and we were coming through, and Indonesia is very, very strict on drugs, and they will go through all your x-ray. Well, they sell all these little packets of white stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So they pulled it out and they said to my husband, "What's this?" And he goes, "That's gluten-free pancake flour mix." They're like, "What?" He was like, "See, gluten-free." And I had to come in and say, "You can open it, you can test it. It's just flour." So then someone behind who knew, they're like, "Oh, yes." And then they would open up something else. "What are these crackers?" I was like, "It's gluten-free." So that was one thing, I think. The second thing was like just making sure I had enough like medication to get through for the first 3 months before, because it is much easier overseas to get and pick up medication. But I didn't know what it was like in some of these
Equivalencies.
countries like I
Yep.
didn't know whether, or even if they had the medication at the time. I found that sometimes they didn't, and I ended up flying from Indonesia to Singapore to get everything that I needed. But that, and I think the biggest thing was making sure that I had the right clothes for the climate that where we were.
Got it.
That was my big thing. Yeah.
3 great things that you need to make sure that you can function and that you
Yeah.
are well taken care of and you feel comfortable in a country. So you have your medications, which is very important, at least to get you through the beginning,
Right.
and the food that you need, specific foods. We all need comfort foods or medical, like
Right.
reasonable food, and then your clothing. That says it all right there. That's a professional traveler.
Yeah.
You are
Yeah.
certainly a
No.
professional.
And I think what we brought back every year was we picked up art. And I heard in your last conversation of like, if you're going to travel from place to place, you got to make sure. And I learned like what how much it is to travel with stuff and repack. Because I listened to Jacqueline and how she brought everything over and all the things she had. I also heard from another expat who said every time when he went home, he would bring these beautiful pieces of artwork or statues and put it in storage in his mother's place, in a storage place in Canada where he lived, And so every time we came home, there was a piece of artwork or something that I wanted or would that I would just say, okay, I'm bringing this home. I'm not leaving it here.
Right. Artwork is usually, for me, it's small stuff. I'll tell you one quick story. I taught in Kuwait for 2 years, and at the end of my stay, one of the parents came in one day very proud, he and his wife, and they said, "Thank you for helping out our son Muhammad, and we have this gift for you." And all of a sudden, these 3 workers, these 3 maintenance guys walk in, and they're carrying like this crate. In the Middle East, a lot of Middle Eastern countries, they're famous for having their glass sculptures, like something inside of glass. And it was
Right.
like a
Yes.
200-pound dhow, which is their
Oh,
old fishing boats, right, made out of wood. And it
right.
was a model, but it was encased in glass. And it was
Glass.
like
Oh my
200
gosh.
pounds. And I was like, somebody did not send out a message to these families that I don't need a 200-pound gift. Like, where do I put it? In the overhead? I got my passport, my wallet, and I've got my 200-pound glass dhow.
Oh my gosh.
So my teaching assistant, she said, "Oh, Greg, it's so beautiful." I said, "It's yours." The minute the parents left, I'm like, "This is yours, Heba. Heba, thank you for working with me for 2 years. I need to leave, but I can't take it with me. Would you please give it a home?" And she's like, "Of course. No, I can't take it from you, Greg." And I'm like, "Please take it from me, please." 200 pounds.
Oh my
Oh.
god.
Well, I think what's interesting, there are some teachers, especially families, that this is their life of international teaching. And they have been traveling and they'll tell me like, oh, when I first came into China, I came with them 18 suitcases. And we had to count them coming off because we were coming from Turkey and, there was no travel package. So we had to purchase and do all this on our own.
Oh,
And
nightmare.
so, so that is, it is interesting what people take and bring with them. But if they're going to make their life, I know families who are making their life like that, they've kind of got the mindset now that it's going to be shipped. So I'm going to buy this. This is what's going to follow with us for the rest of our life because they don't actually have sometimes a home base.
Right.
To go back other than family.
It is different when you're taking a family with you too, because if you have children, you have to have the house with you. You have to have the things that they call home, sort of like in the military, when the military would move us and move all of our stuff 6 or 8 months later, it would show up, but we still had our house. Our stuff just changed a building, but we still had our house. And in my years, of course, as a career international teacher, it's just single. So I have no worries. I'm very blessed in some ways that I don't have to worry about anything. I show up with a suitcase, but that's just me. And maybe it'll change someday, but I'm a minimalist to start with. And that's about it. But I don't have that 200-pound thing anymore. So,
but I'm sure your teaching assistant is so happy to have that. And she remembers you so well.
Shout out,
and she must have great stories.
And that Kuwaiti family, thank you very much for that gift. Is regifted.
Yes, this show goes out to that Kuwaiti family. Yes, she was my assistant for 2 years in Kuwait. She was from Jordan, so it's a good. We had to have assistants with us because it was a special needs school, and I just needed extra help in the classroom. So I was
Arabic
very blessed
speaking.
with that.
I bet you
that was
as
a
well.
long time ago. Pardon me?
Arabic speaking as well, right?
as well
Mhm.
too. Even though I didn't
Hmm.
speak Arabic, I spoke very little, but the English was English only, the school was, but the parents often came in without any English, and the Arabic speaking assistant, Heba, she turned out to be one like a
Mm.
godsend. Once again,
Hmm.
a localized, teacher, had been there a long time, and she was helping me out. So that's going back to our conversation about having a link to the local, as local as you can get,
Mhm.
right? And it really worked out
Hmm.
well.
And I'm in contact with quite a few of my teachers from schools, not only in higher education that I've taught through courses. They constantly come back to me saying, "Hey, Renata, I've left from South America. I'm over here. Can you give me some points? Do you know friends over that I can connect with?" Or they were teachers who I had in Indonesia and I met with, as well as in China, that are now off in other parts of the world saying, "Hey, I met a friend of yours," or "Do you know how to reach out to so and so? I'm now in Vietnam. I'd like to reach out in touch with Christina. Do you know where they are?" So that it was, that's a nice thing that, that people still reach out to you to touch base and say, I need support. I need to know where to go and connect with someone. So I really enjoy that, just catching up with what they're doing and
That was
stuff
my
like that.
next question, Renata. For our listeners, can
Hmm.
you tell us a little bit about how to get in touch with you or how to get you to their school? Is there a way to reach out to you?
Yeah, so I have a website, which is internationaleducationalconsultant.com. It's all one word. I know it's a
Mhm.
mouthful, but the other way is through LinkedIn on Dr. Renata McFarland. You can get me there. And my internationaleducationalconsultant.com website, there's also a contact page. People can go down and send me stuff, and it will send me through Gmail. So you can get a hold of me those two ways.
Yay! We're going to put those in the show notes so
Yes.
everyone can just go access
Okay.
the show notes and click on those
Great.
links. As I'm sure our listeners are going to be very aware that you are highly reachable. Like this is not just talk for Renata, and I'm sure Greg can attest. Like, people will contact you and Renata is more than happy to help. She pays it forward 10
Hmm.
times fold. She had two mentors. Guess how
Yeah.
many people will
Hmm.
count Renata as a mentor? In the thousands.
Mm,
In the thousands,
I'm
Greg. It's
sure.
true. No, it's true.
Yeah. No, my biggest thing is I really want to pay it forward, especially for my local teachers, because I want to teach them the skills and strategies that the expats already have or had the benefit
Yeah.
of having, so that they can actually work better together and understand the needs of what is needed for the children best. And that's my real goal, because those are the things I found teaching overseas that were lacking. And there was that, like you said, that indifferent or that cultural divide
Mhm.
maybe. And I felt like that we got to do something better than this.
Well, that sounds like your final
Mm.
thoughts there. I was about to say, do you
Yes.
want to leave us with something?
No,
But
I think I said it.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
coming
much.
on. I'm so
Yes,
excited for
thank
this.
you so much, Greg. I'm
yeah,
sorry I didn't get to meet Kent, but there's got to be a good reason, and that's okay.
well, listen, Dr. Renata McFarland, on behalf of the International Teacher Podcast and our wayward Kent, I don't know where he is, Matt's with his family somewhere. On our behalf, we would like to thank you for joining us and being on our show. We hope that you come on and see us again and listen to us all the time. We would like to just say one last thing. And if you're ever in Indonesia and you need to get out of a ticket, just claim that you have to go to the hospital
In French. Say it in French.
in French. And we'll see you next episode. Thank you,
Yay.
Doctor.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank
Okay.
you. See you later.